They were watching me read these things, and they wanted to. All right, phones away. Let's get back to Professor Dudek.
Yeah, student view's down right now. So.
Student view's down. All right, put your phones away. We'll do it at the end of class.
All right, so I apologize in advance. I forgot to talk about why Lenin's important. I went on a rant about Che Guevara. Anyway, Lenin changed communism forever. He changed communism into what we know as communism. Before Lenin, communism was an ideology seen as, at its worst, naive. But Lenin changed it to have more authoritative elements. He got the government more involved. He believed the state is what should bring about the revolution, and that we should bring the revolution through the state. This would later be adapted by Stalin to include more authoritarian elements, and that's how it became the big bad evil that was taking over the world. But Lenin also wasn't like an evil dictator like Stalin was. He was someone who believed in a lot of democratic elements. He created an ideology known as democratic centralism, which is what we know as Leninism. Basically that we should have this one giant group of people and this one big party, like this one big tent party, where like all these different ideologies would be represented, and that the people would elect these officials to run like workers' councils, the military, science, everything. He believed the people should be in control of everything. Specifically the working class people, not the bourgeois or the capitalist owners. But those are the three names you gotta keep in mind. Trotsky, Lenin, and Stalin. Do you guys need me to write any of those down?
How do you spell Trotsky?
Trotsky, I'll write down Trotsky.
It's phonetic with a K.
Ah, okay, never mind.
I mean, still write it down.
Okay, yeah, I'll write down all three of them. I'll write down Kerensky too, because I bet you forgot that. Don't bother with last names, first names. Because I don't really use the first name. Nobody does with a friend. You don't call Hitler a-hole. These are the four names you should have written down. Trotsky, Lenin, Stalin, Kerensky. Note that Kerensky hated these three. All right, moving on. To our first big revolution. Finally, we're getting to somewhere interesting.
Ready?
Yep. This is the 1905 revolution, specifically a picture of Bloody Sunday. Now, Bloody Sunday was a peaceful protest at first, started by the Russian Orthodox Church and the Revolutionary Socialist Party. This guy right here is a Russian Orthodox priest known as Georgy Gapon. Nobody talks about him because he's not really relevant outside of this one event. Georgy Gapon saw the injustice and the inequality going on in Russian society at the time and believed that he could take it straight to the doorsteps of the Russian Tsar, and the Tsar would be forced to come down and listen to the will of the people and like have a change of heart. The Tsar shot 300 of his protesters dead.
Ordered his army to. He did not actually.
He did not himself. He didn't. No. No. His army decided to shoot 300 of these men dead. Miraculously, Gapon survived, by the way, but was later executed by the Socialist Revolutionary Party. Now that is what kicked off the rest of the 1905 revolution, led by these four. It failed.
That's crazy.
They all got exiled. They all got sent to different countries. However, some of them got brought back eventually. Notably, Lenin got brought back.
Sorry, you can continue. I'll ask what.
Notably, Lenin got brought back by the German Empire.
Because
Germany needed to get rid of one of its allies, and Lenin was hell-bent on getting Russia out of World War I.
So Germany was trying to sabotage during World War I. Germany was like, how can we destabilize Russia, kick them out of the war, and then we don't have a two-front war anymore? We're going to send this ticking time bomb of a human back to Russia, because he had been exiled in Germany.
How come the Russian Socialist Party executed Georgy Gapon?
Georgy Gapon was said to be working with the Tsar because of his religion. He was a very high-ranking member of the Russian Orthodox Church.
Which was closely tied with the royal family.
Yeah, think about France before the revolution. It's very similar circumstances. Georgy Gapon, sorry, that's the gangster. Gapon got executed because he was too closely tied to the religion, and the revolutionaries were becoming way more secular. So they had him go to like some house in Serbia and just hung him. Brutal.
So he was seen as suspicious, and rather than let it be a contagion of him spreading, like, calm down, we don't really need a full revolution, we can all work together and change the goodness of our hearts. They thought he was too moderate, actually, too.
Yeah, that's another part of it. All right. Russians are brutal. Anyway, moving on. This is a map of the Russian Empire that you all have already seen. I wanted to talk about briefly. Actually, wait. Hold on. Who could tell me about the Russian Empire before the revolution?
Starving. Poor.
True. Anything else?
Giant, hard to control.
Anything else?
Wasn't there like a ton of serfs too going on?
Yes. Serfdom and a form of what was the system before caste? The feudal system was really in control of Russia at the time. Yeah, I'm watching the clock. And even though there was a Russian Enlightenment that changed a lot of things by Peter the Great, and like that was ushered in, it was still a feudal system. It was still behind compared to most of Europe, compared to America, compared to a lot of Asian and Arabian countries too.
And also Russia is so big that they're all talking about like industrial revolution. Well, that is mainly on the part closest to Logan there, Moscow, St. Petersburg. Those cities had industrialized, but the bulk of Russia was agriculture, it was agrarian, and a lot of those people were poor, starving farmers. And then during World War II, they were the ones that got drafted and pushed into the war, ground up like a meat grinder. So the farms were empty of the men who had done the farm work, and it completely changed and broke the agrarian system. So now everyone's hungry, in addition to seeing the industrial problem.
Sorry, you had a question?
I had a comment, but
Okay.
she answered it.
Okay. All right, so yeah, that's basically the bulk of the Russian Empire. I'm glad you guys know it. Next slide. Do we really need to talk about this? That's my question to you guys. Do you guys know about what happened here? Not this picture specifically, but in general, Russia in World War I. Who can tell me about it?
Eastern Front.
Someone else. Anybody? Owen?
There was a lot more movement like in the Eastern Front, so it did end up like a lot of Russia did get kind of just like pounded, and then they kind of took it back. And I know there's like specifically it did end up having like several bloody battles. Like I think Stalingrad was one of the worst fought.
Wasn't quite
World
called
War II.
Stalingrad yet.
Stalingrad, yeah, but
Quinn?
Did they have like 1.4 million sustaining army, and then at the end it was just massacred. Like I don't know the exact number at the end, but like they lost most of their army.
Weren't they also very far behind military evolution and like artillery? Like they didn't have the same resources or technology that other military had. They only
Yeah.
had numbers.
Basically,
And they had smaller train tracks, so it was impossible to move guys. And there was the quote, like, the guys in the back of the line waited till the guy in the front was killed before they could actually have a weapon. So they had supply issues, they had movement issues, they had technology issues. Nora?
I think it was like the battle of one of the things that happened.
Tannenberg.
They had like they were outnumbered Germany 2-1 and still lost.
And they still lost, yep.
Because of a lack of like communication and proper strategy. So they were behind like in terms of the resources that they had, but also just the function as an army itself.
They fought a very early type of war where they just thought that their superior numbers would overwhelm an army. But in World War I, as we've noticed, the technology evens the playing field. You could have way less people with better technology and easily win a battle.
how very Roman. Next slide. These. Oh wait, did we skip one?
I don't know.
Huh. Oh.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I guess we're talking about the Mensheviks. These are the Mensheviks. Wait.
So we had the soldiers,
Mensheviks?
and then so we went soldiers.
Oh, wait, yeah, no, never mind. Mensheviks, alright. So these I want to talk about are the Mensheviks because I mentioned them before, so I wanted to talk about them first. The Mensheviks were the minority within Russian revolutionaries. These are Mensheviks, Pavel Axelrod, Julius Martov, and Alexander Martinov. I don't expect you to have these written down. These guys specifically aren't important. I like Julius Martov, and I like talking about him because he's really interesting, but we're not going to because this is a crash course. Mensheviks, I'll write down that on the board.
What are they?
The Mensheviks were the minority party within Russian revolutionaries. They were the more moderate ones. This is what the Socialist Revolutionary Party turned into. These guys were the ones who wanted more liberal reforms instead of straight communism. These guys just wanted a democratic socialist society. These guys wanted stuff that, in a lot of ways, we call the Nordic model in Central Europe? Yeah, Central Europe.
Northern Central.
Northern Central Europe. These guys were not the Russian red communists that we know. These guys were the democratic socialists. These guys were, Julius Martov, I'd argue, was kind of like Bernie Sanders, if we want to put it in a modern context.
That's an excellent connection to make. So you have to remember, in the Democratic Party today, we've got Bernie Sanders, who's seemingly, he's really not that extreme, but he is seen as extreme, let's pay for college, let's give everyone this. And then you have Democrats, maybe from the South, who are a little more conservative. So there's always a spectrum, all right? The Democrats go from a conservative Democrat to quite an extreme liberal Democrat within the Democratic Party, which tends to be more progressive and liberal than the Republicans. Same in the Republican Party, all right? Not all the Republicans are extremist, shut down libraries, et cetera, et cetera. There are very liberal Republicans. If you go to Oregon, a Republican in Oregon is kind of like a Democrat in Michigan. So there's always a big spectrum. These guys were in the revolutionary spectrum, but they're more in the middle. They're more predictable and practical.
Apologies if this is a little weird, but think of an entire party of Bernie Sanders with guns, and you kind of got a simplified idea of what the Mensheviks were.
Have you guys seen that meme with Bernie Sanders with his big old mittens?
Yeah, I've seen
Financial support.
Think that he's got his mittens sitting like this, and then he's like, whoosh, and has his guns out.
Write that down in your
Draw it.
Time for the opposite of the Mensheviks. Wait. Never mind. All right.
That's what's next.
So the Mensheviks led a, I don't know my own slideshow apparently. The Mensheviks led a revolution that was known as the February Revolution. These were the guys who first overthrew the Tsar. They were like, that's it, we're sick of this. This is
1917.
This is 1917, so we're finally in the era that we wanted to talk about. So these are the guys who were like, all right, that's it, we're overthrowing the Tsar, we're gonna become a democracy, we're gonna become a republic.
All right, pause. When he says guys, let's look at this picture.
There's not just guys, there's a lot of women.
And kids.
Children.
Yeah.
People of all ages, of both genders, of anything were affected by the injustices and the inequality of the Russian society.
And if you look at this picture, I don't know if you look closely, it's mostly women.
Yeah.
All right, it's mostly women because the women were stepping up. The men are at war. They're seeing that their men are gone. They have to support their families with them gone, and there's not enough food, and their kids are hungry. So the February March was very, very pushed by women, which then put the army in a very delicate position. You have a mob of angry women, and if the Tsar says shoot them, you're the army going, what? Seriously? So then you may have a change of heart in what exactly is your job to do, to protect your country or to do what the Tsar says.
I also want to note with both the February Revolution and the October Revolution we're going to talk about soon, a lot of it was ethnic minorities. A lot of these people came from countries that were being oppressed by the Tsar. Some of these people were coming from Ukraine. Some of these people were Jews. Some of these people were Romanis. Some of these people were Arabs. People from Nagorno-Karabakh or Azerbaijan and Armenia. These people were being oppressed by this Christian white supremacist Tsar and his monarchy. And they were sick of it, and they wanted a republic like what we saw in America, like what we saw in the UK is a bad example, sorry.
But they were pushed by the deprivations of the war.
Yes.
Like, they've been unhappy for a while, but now they're unhappy and hungry. All right? And then they're like, screw it, we gotta do something.
And this was led by, where did I write it? The Mensheviks, who were the moderate ones, which is what led to, but notably, the Mensheviks kept Russia in World War I. Kerensky decided to keep Russia in World War I. He introduced a lot of reforms. The Russian government changed. There was a provisional government, but he kept them in World War I, and that's what led to a rise. Next slide. That's what led to the rise of the Bolsheviks. Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin's group. Although Trotsky was briefly a Menshevik. You don't have to know that. He didn't do anything in the party. Trotsky, Lenin, and Stalin gained a... There's Stalin right there. Sorry, there's Lenin right there. These guys were These guys were guys who were more radical, more revolutionary. They wanted more. They wanted to get Russia out of World War I. They wanted a revolution that represented a working class government. These guys were sick and tired of the provisional government too. They were going to overthrow them as well. Once they had the Tsar out of the way, it's time for these guys to take control. I can't tell you who all of these men are, honestly, because there were so many Bolsheviks. Bolshevik means majority party. The Menshevik meant minority party. I'll write that down for you guys too, because... And the Bolsheviks were so big tent as well. Trotsky and Stalin hated each other. Trotsky saw Stalin as this bureaucratic, power-hungry little demon of a man, and Stalin saw Trotsky as this whiny, old, horrifying, dangerous imperialist. And because Stalin was anti-Semitic, a part of that was because Trotsky was a Jew.
I might be thinking of the wrong revolution, but wasn't there a twist where they had the majority, they called themselves the majority and they're the minority, and they called themselves they call the other people the minority and they're the majority? Or is that the German, in the Nazis?
I think that sort of is the October one.
So, yeah,
A lot of the, yeah, it's like, the Bolsheviks started as the minority, but because Russia was still in World War I, they started gaining prominence. So you're correct.
There we go.
But these guys led what was known as the October Revolution. This revolution was bloodless. Nobody died. That's what I want to note. But look at all these people. These soldiers, these people of many different backgrounds, of many different countries, wanted to get Russia out of World War I. And so what they did was they stormed the Kremlin, I think.
No, I thought it was the Winter Palace.
Sorry, yeah, they stormed the Winter Palace, and they kicked out Kerensky. They kicked out everybody in the provisional government. They had them all exiled. Kerensky came here to America and became a conservative activist. It's really interesting. I still want to know why. And Lenin took control of the government, and he installed his own government.
So from February to October, it was kind of like this gray area, is that we had the Mendeviks, right?
Mensheviks.
In power, but they really didn't have any power. Nobody was listening to them. They were still fighting the war. The people were unhappy. It just, the February Revolution, to me, just means the monarchs were taken out. And the people are trying to figure out what to do. And unfortunately, they didn't figure it out fast enough, because by October, the people were sick of giving them a chance. And then they swept them out as well.
Yep.
And what is happening to the royal family during this time?
The royal family was being put in prison, and what happened when Lenin took control was that he decided that they were a threat, that they could take control. And not only did he decide that the Tsar was a threat, because there was a rising thing known as the White Army that was going to counter-revolutionize Russia and bring it back to the Tsar. Not only did he feel like the Tsar was a threat, but he also felt like the Tsar's wife and kids were a threat. So on his order, they were taken into a house and had their brains blown out on a ceiling. A very brutal consequence of the Russian Revolution. The Tsar, for as incompetent, as imperialistic, and as sort of awful as he was,
I'd say clueless more than competent.
I mean, he led a lot of pogroms.
Yeah, he did a lot of bad things because he just was like, let's try this.
Right.
It was just...
It was the Tsar's incompetence and, quite frankly, his idiocy that led to that horrifying, quite frankly, fate for the Tsar and his family. His kids, I want to know, were your age. They were my age, they were you guys' age. They were not old at all. Their son was sick. I still don't understand. And as much as I like to defend a lot of the elements of the Russian Revolution and sort of sympathize with the revolutionaries, there's nothing to defend about executing children. And moving on to the Russian Civil War. Speaking of dead children, Russian Civil War. So the Russian Civil War is very interesting because neither side was organized. The White Army was a lot of the Mensheviks, a lot of the Royalists, a lot of the moderate conservatives, Democrats. The Red Army didn't know what it was doing either. But under the leadership of Leon Trotsky, it managed to organize itself enough to really overthrow the White Army. That wasn't the only threat during the Russian Civil War, though.
You still have 15 or 13 minutes.
Russian nihilism bred anarchism in Russia, and that became a huge thing during the revolution. There were these anarchists who led a thing known as the Black Army.
So was the Red Army like the Bolsheviks?
Yeah, they were the Bolsheviks and like the communists and the socialists. The White Army had socialists too, but it was more like Menshevik, democratic socialists, social democrats. And these guys swept the White Army because the White Army was so disorganized because there was so many different ideological groups that there was constant infighting. And because they didn't have a czar and their family to revolve around, they got destroyed by Trotsky, who wasn't even that great of like a military leader. This guy didn't have any military experience before he went into the army. This guy just decided to throw his way into it because Lenin was like, I trust you. And he managed to win, and he also destroyed the anarchists in ways that are still considered inhumane. Like the anarchists had a battleground that Trotsky brought his soldiers in and just gassed the whole place. They threw gas bombs everywhere and just killed everybody in this like little commune. Who, while mostly soldiers, was still women. There were still some women and children. It's still debated whether or not Trotsky knew that, but even so, reckless, horrifying move.
Not.
So yeah, the anarchists, I'd argue, got destroyed the most, but that's just because they had the White Army and the powers of the Red Army just coming in. Is there any other side? Yeah. So this is now, we're finally at Soviet Union, the creation of communist Russia. There was good and there was bad. The good, more access to healthcare, more access to education, more equality for the genders. Homosexuality was legalized. A lot of more secular liberal reforms. And
So the church was neutralized. The church didn't have as much power there.
Basically.
Secular means it was about the government and the state and the citizens, regardless of your religion.
And more people were eating. But there was brutal political repression. Lenin created a system known as gulags to throw in the counter-revolutionaries, a lot like Robespierre during his reign of terror. Anybody who disagreed with the revolution got executed, dead, boom. And while there was still a lot of democratic elements, it wasn't a fully democratic society. It was very authoritarian, and it became a little brutal. And under Stalin, it became incredibly brutal. And by the time Stalin took control, the people weren't even eating either because of how much Stalin was oppressing the farms and the kulaks and the people who ran the farms. So the revolution briefly worked. That's what I like to say. The revolution was great for a brief period of time under him. And then by the time he died, Trotsky and Stalin had this giant fight, and there was a split between the party, between the Trotskyists and the Stalinists. They both called themselves Leninists and refused to call themselves by the names they were given because they were hell-bent on calling themselves Lenin's will. They were both like, I am Lenin incarnate. And they started to like really fight. And Lenin became seen as like a religious symbol in a way. People rallied around him as if he was Jesus Christ himself.
Is this related to the martyrdom you're talking about, where in death they get more powerful?
In a way, yeah.
And it's interesting because
He died in power.
He died in power, and the 100th year of his death is coming up, and the Putin is like barely even acknowledging it. It's very funny how how the Russian Revolution, which started Russia and changed all these things, is being swept under the rug by Putin.
It's not convenient for Putin to talk
It's
about
not
because
convenient.
Putin's very autocratic. And
revolution? Yeah, let's not talk about that.
right. Popular leader, everybody's gonna rally around. We can't, like, that'd be like if we talked about, I don't know, it's like, I can't think of a good example right now. Maybe I'll think about it in third hour. But Lenin was very popular. Lenin was beloved by the people around him. And Trotsky and Stalin both knew that and wanted to take full advantage of that. And they both fought each other. I'd argue that Trotsky came up, I don't want to be biased or sound like a sympathizer, but Trotsky came at it with a much more genuine place because Stalin and Lenin had a split eventually. Lenin thought Stalin was becoming too brutal, too dangerous, too power hungry. And while Trotsky and Lenin had a split in the 1905 revolution because Trotsky became a Menshevik and Lenin led the Bolsheviks, they reconciled and became friends, and their ideologies became way closer than before. It wasn't like that with Stalin. Stalin was more about power than anything else. I don't want to say like, oh, look at the evil dictator. This is the bad guy. These are the good guys. It's way more complicated than that.
But in this case, it actually
But Stalin
is
was
accurate.
very power hungry. Stalin wasn't an intellect like Lenin. and
Which
Trotsky.
is very interesting when we come to World War II and FDR, who is quite progressive, and after the Great Depression, a lot of things are changing towards more socialist ideas in the United States. The Social Security, workers' rights, all these things that popped up during the Great Depression in the United States were very socialist driven. And now you have this power hungry guy who says they're socialist and communist but isn't really, and then FDR's got to work with him, and hence the Cold War.
And that is in a crash course, a very brief, very oversimplified version of the Russian Revolution. Any questions, comments, concerns, things you want me to go get deeper into, things you want me to sort of elaborate, anything?
Because I don't have this depth of knowledge. You should ask Logan.
If you're just even mildly interested in this topic at all. Hey,
I've asked enough questions.
Pretty impressive, dude.
thank you, I appreciate it.
So the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire controlled a whole bunch of places like Ukraine and Armenia, Azerbaijan, all those little nations that we've learned about. And that was part of the empire. And when the empire fell, then it became the Soviet Union. So each of these regions became their own autonomous group under the Soviet umbrella. Soviet means what?
Soviet, I forget what Soviet means actually. I think it was like People's Council or something.
Yeah, so it became, theoretically on paper, it looks kind of like our Confederacy, the Articles of Confederation after the American Revolution, how all the states kind of were their own thing and we all worked together under this umbrella of unity. The Articles of Confederation did not work in the United States, right? We had to write a new constitution and actually make us all work together. It worked in the Soviet Union because they made it work. They refused to let it slide.
Would you say during the beginning of the Russian Revolution, after Marxism kind of reached Russia, would you say that communism spread between the Russian people like Enlightenment spread to the French people?
Very similar, actually. Yeah, that's a very good comparison. I was comparing this a lot to the French Revolution, and that is an excellent point. Because Marx came out of a thing, last thing. Marx came out of
5 minutes, we're good.
Marx came out of a movement known as the Counter-Enlightenment, where people were looking at Enlightenment ideas and let's change them. Nihilism came from that movement as well, and was like, guys, are things really worth it? And Marx...
Can we really make everyone better by education and thinking, or does life suck so bad that we just have to accept it?
A simplified term, yeah, that's what it is. But Marx was like, is this capitalist system really humane? Is this really what our human nature leads to? And he wanted to expand on it. So that's a very interesting point. There's a lot of parallels between the Enlightenment revolutions and the Russian Revolution and just everything it represents. I wish I could have gotten more into it, but unfortunately, we only had an hour, so I had to give you guys a crash course.
Also keep in mind that socialism is more of a theory, an economic theory, whereas communism is a political party, all right? So when people use those terms communist and socialist interchangeably, it's actually wrong. Socialism is an idea, and it mainly deals with how the economy should run. But humans don't like to share. Rich people don't like to give up their money and share it with the workers. So you need the government to step in and be like, hey, rich people, share with the poor people, or else. That's how communism then steps in to try to force socialism to work.
I think it's also interesting to point out that after Stalin took over, even though he was considered like he was trying to be like a communist, he actually did more like fascist things, which is on the other side of the political spectrum. Like he was putting people in death camps and everything, which is very fascist and like trying to keep control, but he was still considered like a communist.
And just because you call yourself something, I mean, the People's Democratic Republic of China is not a democratic republic, right? Just because you call yourself a communist or a socialist or whatever, doesn't mean you actually are. So when we get to World War II, we'll look a little more closely about what fascism and what communism looked like and how the world, Hitler and Stalin got along, even for a little while. Like, it's because they're both evil. All right.
So this is more of like something that I was like taught like last year. It's the idea that like the political spectrum, instead of just being like a line where you have like super far left and super far right, it's more of like a circle. So like once you get super far left or super far right, it kind of just like meets at the point of just like
No return, pretty
super
much.
extreme,
Yeah.
and you're just kind of crazy.
That's pretty accurate.
And the people suffer.
Yeah. So I guess if there's a lesson to take from the Russian Revolution, it's don't make sure your ideology is furbished and like really like taken care of and carefully looked at and changed in certain aspects, and make sure that your leaders are humane enough and that you're putting your trust in the right people if you want to overthrow a government. I don't know how many of you want to do that. Well, I didn't get to ask that question. Raise your hand. Who wants to overthrow the government?
Let's do it. Why not?
Yeah, come on.
Which government are you talking about? Because there are many layers of government.
The local government.
The local government, which
Down
is
with Sean
what?
Ryan.
Which is the Independence Township
School board.
School Board. You want to overthrow the school board?
Yeah, Logan. Have Sam and Matt do it too.
Hey, everyone give Logan a
My
round
phone
of
was
applause.
Could you send me that like through like email or something like
I
that?
can try. It's 30 minutes long.
Alright,
I just
thank
posted on YouTube.
All right,
Just
thank
like make it unlisted.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure how good the audio picked it up because it's a phone.
It's all right.
So yeah, have Matt and Sam do it too. Just to
Yeah,
make sure.
Thanks very much.